Hello, friends. On today's episode, I have a conversation with special guest Steven Bernstein. He is a very successful cinematographer, director, screenwriter, and author. Some of his past projects you might know as Monster with Charlize Theron, The Waterboy with Adam Sandler, Scary Movie 2, White Chicks, and many more. Hi, Steven. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We recently became friends, I guess, on Instagram. I think you followed me and then I followed you back. And then I saw um, your past work and I was like, wow. So you have been, a cinematographer on a lot of projects that, you know, are my childhood, that I grew up basically watching. And so,
You're about to say white chicks. I know you're about to say white.
no, well, the Waterboy actually was really
All right, fair enough.
a
Okay.
family favorite. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but you have done so many. You just for the listeners, you've done Monster with Charlize Theron. You've done Half Baked. You've done The Waterboy. You've done personally my favorite Scary Movie 2. And even on that, you've had a lot of collaborations with the Wayans brothers.
I have.
Yeah, and so even just starting with that, collaboration I know is really so important in this industry, and I'm curious, how did you build that relationship? And I'm sure they obviously really trust you with your vision and even creating their vision. So
Yeah.
would love to hear
Well,
about that.
it's the way everything kind of works in film. Early on, when I was less personable than I am now, and I was really confident that I was hugely talented and nothing else mattered, someone said to me, there's a lot of talented people who gravitate to the film industry. But there aren't a lot of talented people who are really easy to work with.
Mm.
And yet all of us choose to work with the ones who are easy to work with, not just the ones who are talented. And they basically said to me that I should get my act together. Unfortunately, I was young enough that I still could.
Mm.
And I came to understand that really a measure of success in this industry is determined by a few different things. First of all, you better be good at your job, which means in the downtime like now, you should always be preparing for the as yet uncertain job, reading, looking at films, in my case, looking at art, acquiring new skill sets, perfecting ones that you had before. And then secondly, you have to learn how to get along with others. And in the creative process, you have to learn how to facilitate others' visions. It can't only be about your own. You have to be there to serve others, to help others. And even when you have a different understanding, they might find a way to compromise and collaborate. These are human skill sets, but essential in film, where on a feature film set with lots of money is being spent each day, if you're difficult, your shelf life is very short.
That's true.
So,
Yeah, a lot of
early,
money. Hmm?
yeah, exactly right. And early on, I did a film with Adam Sandler and with Damon Wayans called Bulletproof,
Hmm.
and it was for Universal. And I had just come back to America from England. I think it was my first studio film after returning to the States. And Ernest Dickerson, who was Spike Lee's cinematographer for years, was the director. Liked me very much for my technical abilities. And then once on set, all of us got along exceptionally well. I got along with the studio executives from Universal, a guy named Bob Simons, who became a very big time player, who subsequently hired me on like 6 jobs, I think. Adam Sandler liked me a lot, who subsequently hired me on Waterboy. Damon Wayans liked me a lot and recommended me to his brothers. And so many things grew out of that. Not only because I was fast and the work looked good and it's actually very, very slickly made film, but because I was personable and supportive and gave way when I had to help realize other people's visions, and had a vision of my own, which I could articulate so that we can combine and help each other make the best possible film.
That's absolutely the best way to go about it. And I think you never really know what collaborations could lead to what, and just this one film for you led to so many opportunities. I'm
Yeah,
curious.
you can be sure of any good act you do will eventually probably go forgotten, but it's safe. Anybody you offend you can pretty much be sure they'll spend their life trying to destroy your career. So try not to offend anybody.
No, that's a very good point. So I'm curious. I know I saw a video that you said you've been doing this for well over 30 years, right?
I have, yeah. I mean, a lot more than 30 years, but I don't want to say because if I seem too old, I won't be able to get work because it's another problem. But no, it's been a long time. And I started. I'm an American, but I moved to England early on and began working for the BBC and others. Um, I had trained mainly as a writer and a researcher, so really never meant to get into the camera side. But through a series of accidents and incidents and opportunities, I ended up owning a 16 millimeter camera, this is the days before digital,
Yeah.
which was a way to do film for a relatively low budget. I mean, 35 was exponentially more expensive than 16. You could spend a reasonable sum of money and produce something. And then somebody had the idea of making music videos for aspiring artists to send to what's called A&R men at the record company so they could see a sample of what the band looked like or the artist looked like live. So someone said, you got a camera, you shot some stuff. They knew me from the BBC. Could you come down one weekend and just shoot this guy against a white sheet? And I did. And then we did another one, and it was two guys, and then it was one location. And then why don't we do a little story? And then why don't we add some smoke? Why don't we do a wet down? Why don't we put some backlight on? And eventually, why don't we spend £1 million doing some enormous music video? And I did an enormous number of bands then, and it was great. It was great because you couldn't do anything wrong. Everything became, I used to say, there's no mistakes, there's only motifs. So I decided one day to just do everything with backlight, so you couldn't even see the faces, and then wet everything down and use a cobalt blue, so the skin tones were deep blue. As long as people responded to it viscerally, because it went with music, people thought it was cool. And eventually, I did a music video for David Sylvian where I had the idea of shooting it entirely out of focus. And we did, and it won all sorts of awards. And then it influenced like a whole generation of video directors who started shooting at least part of the sequences very often out of focus and come in and out of focus and start playing with the medium so that there were no rules. And when you can experiment every single day that you're shooting, you begin to become a master of the skill set you need to become a cinematographer at a higher level, because I experimented with every possible lens, filter, slow motion, overcranking, undercranking, filters, different types of gauze that we stretch over the lens, shooting with Super 8 cameras, opening the door of the camera intentionally to expose the film, scratching the emulsion of the film with steel wool pad, all these things, which I could then later apply to my skills as a feature cinematographer.
Interesting. Did you have a mentor, or were you all self-taught during all that?
I had lots of mentors, but nothing formal. I would meet other cinematographers. We would exchange notes. My mentors were my study. I would mainly be influenced by painting and painters and illustrators. So I remember looking at Maxwell Parrish early in my career and really delighting in the colors. If the themes were a bit banal, the colors were fantastic. And then tried to work with my gaffer and others, trying to discover the gels that would create those color values in motion pictures. I am a cineast, so I've looked at lots of movies, so would be influenced from everything from Orson Welles to more obscure filmmakers like Chris Marker, and then the commercials were very big in England in the late 70s and 80s. So there's some brilliant commercials directors, including a young guy called Ridley Scott, who was discovering his ability. And we would inspire each other, all of us who are working in commercials and music videos. And in those days in England, the commercials would be shown before the films in the cinema. So they would be shot on 35 millimeter. They would have big production values, and they look like mini features. So you can imagine how high the bar was set and how we all cross-influenced each other.
Absolutely. You could tell that that bar has dropped since. Yeah, absolutely. They don't put that much into them anymore. You said that you were originally wanting to be a writer and then you drifted more into cinematography. I'm curious, what kind of was the catapult to even start this journey to begin with?
Well, look, that's the big question for anyone who's involved in any creative art. For me, it's about confusion and misery. I think is the source for most people who then embark on discovering a method for recreating the world that is more amenable to them. So for me, I was a tortured youth. I wrote to create a fictive world that I could more happily inhabit, and also to try to understand the world that I didn't function in particularly well. And then, as I began that, I began examining other methods of communicating. The thing that mediates all of our ideas is we have to communicate them to somebody else. And the way we do that is something that all of us should study, and many of us don't, because we start with an idea. The idea doesn't just by osmosis appear in another person's brain. It has to be communicated by an encoding of that idea. So not to be complicated, but language, all language is an encoding of an idea. I think of something, I create a series of plosives or other sounds or sibilants with my voice, and it's a code that you and I both recognize, which is the English language, and you have some semblance of an understanding of what I mean to say when I say it. But really, when we break all art down into the signified, which is the idea, and the signifier, which is the communication, then we have a different understanding of all parts of art. So, for example, spoken, it's the words. But in cinematography, it can be the composition. An asymmetrical composition can make an audience feel uncomfortable. A high-angle shot can make someone seem weak. A character in shadow can seem frightening and the subject of menace. So this is the way we encode ideas visually. So oddly, the transition from troubled person doing self-therapy to writer trying to structure the world through imposing a false order, which is what all fiction is. It's imposing an order on a chaotic world. And then finally, graduating from that to the language of cinematography is all to do with the encoding of ideas, just using different languages.
That's true. And I always tell people, directing or filmmaking is therapy for the director. Um,
Absolutely.
in Yeah, in a way, I mean, just for my own sake, I've used my films in a way to kind of not premeditate, but kind of set myself up for in the future for something that I know I'll be going through, and I'll kind of deal with the emotions that kind of come with that now, rather than being surprised by it, I suppose.
No, absolutely.
But
I always tell writers, young writers, 'cause that's why 90% of my occupation now is writing, is that never start with an outline. Because if you start with an outline, you're presuming what you've discovered before you've begun the journey of discovery. Begin writing and write 120 pages without stopping to decide where it's going. Then read those pages and discover what you're thinking. It's backwards, but it works much better for writers. All these books about structure and the three acts and save the small mammal or save the cat or whatever it is all acts of madness because it focuses entirely on structure rather than genuine creative process, which is discovering what you mean rather than presuming you know what you mean before you even start the process.
that's very true. I was around 12 years old when I just started, writing stories and scripts and what have you. But it was, around that time, it was in its purest raw form. I would know the beginning and the end of my story and just let the middle figure itself out, create itself, And after going to film school, I do notice, having these structures and these rules really kind of hindered the creative experience and kind of the creating this idea. So
So same
yeah,
thing.
that
When I
is
work with actors, the same thing. I always, I write my last film was called Last Call, the one with John Malkovich and Risa Fons and Roma Gary and Tony Hale and Rodrigo Santoro and big cast. And it's very, very wordy and kind of theatrical. John Malkovich said it was the best script he read in like 7 or 8 years, which is very, very flattering.
Mm,
But the thing about it, when I was working with the actors, I would say to them, as much as I love my own words and my own writing, improvise whenever you want. And I would intentionally say to an actor, change this line. I'm not going to tell the other actor you're doing it, to see how they respond, so that the actors could discover the truth of their characters and not feel obligated to go down a particular path. Now, in the end, we'd always work our way back towards the script as written, but not before they had discovered the truth of the moment by being free to
mm.
express and experiment. Facilitating that freedom in the writing process, in cinematography and directing, and then working your way back towards structure, I think is a much better way than presuming you know what the structure should be, or saying to an actor you know what their performance should be. I often say to actors, I don't know where we should go with this. Let's experiment and see where we end up. We begin to experiment. We both get an intuition about where it should go, and we end up in the right place, I hope.
And I saw a video of you recently about how you communicate to actors. And I know every actor, like you said, is different. I know you mentioned Helen Hunt. She's more of an intellectual actor. And then you mentioned Samantha Norton. She's more of an intuitive method
Yeah.
actor. So I'm curious that, because every actor is different. Like you said even Aaron Paul was, had um, their own kind of method. As a director, how is that, when working with an actor and working with them as an individual in their own style?
Well, it's a great question because it goes to, again, language. And very often we presume a meaning of a word, and that inhibits us because then we try to make the world fit into that meaning. When you say the
Mm,
word director, people presume it's someone maybe with a riding crop and joffers with a vaguely dramatic accent screaming at cast and crew as to how they should do things. And in fact, that's not what a director does at all. You should think of a director more as a therapist,
exactly.
or like in Dante, it's Virgil leading people through the underworld.
Well, I've even
What you're there,
I've even joked
yeah,
saying sometimes the director is a therapist, but also an anti-therapist, because instead of trying to heal you, sometimes we reintroduce this trauma and bring you back into that. Um,
yeah, maybe I would. Yeah, I would hate to admit that to anyone, but between you and I, probably no one else is listening. That's sometimes what we do, but really, we're trying to work as a companion to everybody on the set: the cinematographer, the sound recordist, the production designer, the costumer. We'll have a general vision, and then we'll say, "Look, here's a scene. This is a scene where she discovers that her husband's been unfaithful to her. I want her to seem vulnerable to find strength." I'll say to the production designer, what do you think we should do in the design? Have a think about it. I'll say to the costumer what she should be wearing. And I'll say to the artist, what is she feeling? Where do you think she's at? And one of the things I do is I concentrate very heavily on backstory with all my actors.
mm,
I'll create pages and pages and pages of backstory, which is imaginary. And this is very dangerous territory because as a writer, you can very often write backstory to set up your plot. Someone's saw his brother, killed in a wood chipper, and now later in his adult life he feels guilty, and that's cheap and manipulative, and
mm.
the single act motivation is just not good writing because people are more complex than that. But if instead we create backstory that has to do with just an ordinary life, that has all its complexities and all its strange travails and all its different directions in which life goes, then when the actor is acting, they can suddenly draw on some event that you've agreed upon that they experienced years before. It may be anomalous and have nothing to do with the plot, but it creates that vermicide, that reality of saying, oh, yeah, this is the way people really talk. They reference things that have nothing to do with the narrative. When we live our lives, we may ultimately look back on our lives and see it as a single narrative. But usually it's kind of confusing. We start in one direction, we end up in another, where we don't know whether we want to break up with our girlfriend or not. We don't know whether we want to go down a career path or not. Things change and are mixed up. And when characters express those things, they seem more real. And when characters seem more real, the audience cares more about their journey. Look at the films of Mike Leigh, everything based on improv, having nothing to do with plot or overweening arc or single line narrative, just ordinary lives full of complexities and inconsistencies. So I think that's what we as directors do is We produce an atmosphere conducive to creative expression, safe,
Hmm.
not threatening. We tell everyone they can take risks. We're the safety net. They won't be punished. They won't be ridiculed. We're not going to raise our voices. We're never going to lie to an actor ever. You tell the smallest lie, like saying that was great, which seems like encouragement. They never trust you again. So when they are great and you say they're great, they don't believe you if you lied to them before. And we say, hey, look, here's a backstory. Let's draw on that. And then we ask questions like to an actor, what were you feeling when you were doing that? Do you remember this incident we talked about that happened in your childhood? Would that come to the fore here, do you think? And we work together to facilitate their best performance. And in that sense, we're a great help to actors, and we're facilitators.
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, I'm curious, what is your overall proudest moment, either on set or just in general?
I'm still living, so
That's true.
the moments continue to accumulate, and things that I was proud of before, I'm not proud of now. But I'm more proud of the fact that right now, every morning I wake up and I take an ice cold shower for 20 minutes.
Mm.
So that to me, and I'm writing in the middle of this pandemic. And I'm doing a variety of other things that I didn't think I'd be capable of anymore, because I'm worried that with all the stress of the current times, I would burn out and lose focus. But I'm doing them, so I'm proud of those things. But I look back on my career. Look, Monster, when I arrived there, I was shooting SWAT. I got a call from Clark Peterson, a friend who was the producer of it, and the film was in trouble. I think they were a day in, and they were thinking of shutting the film down
Oh, wow.
for a series of catastrophes that had befallen them. And I was still shooting SWAT, and they said to me, Clark had known me, had done some low budget films when I first arrived in the States. Is there any way I could leave the last few weeks of SWAT, where I was being paid a fortune, by the way? There's a reason I'm telling you that, and come and shoot Monster for virtually no money.
Hmm.
And I said that was out of the question. But I read the script. I spoke to Patty and I spoke to Charlize, and I thought them singular in their dedication to their shared vision, full of enthusiasm and integrity. And I thought, well, I've done great work on SWAT. I've blown up the front of the LA library. I've crashed a couple of airplanes, 3/4 size. Had 23 cameras working on the old Third Street Bridge. I've done everything I can do here. The film's almost what the hell? I'll go to Florida and help them finish this little film, which no one will ever see. I hadn't really seen much of Charlize's work, and she was relatively unknown. She was kind of a beautiful girl that was always a support character, but didn't have a major lead.
Hmm.
But when I got there, we reconstructed the crew. We changed our methodology. We started again and used a lot of physical freedom for Charlize. For example, normally we put marks down and have actors go to marks so they can hit the lights just right. But I saw the way Charlize was acting, and she was completely possessed by this character. So I thought it would be a good idea to eliminate marks so she doesn't have to look for them. And what we did was we'd have a camera assistant off to the side who would see where she was moving, and then radio to the focus puller next to the camera, who would then move the focus according to the report coming over the radio, so that
Wow.
Charlize could go wherever she wanted. And then, of course, then there's a problem with lights, because she would be coming in and out of light. So I said, oh, let's not have stationary lights. We got some painter's poles and we put some paper lanterns at the end of them. And I spoke to each of the electricians, and I said, when she moves here, that light goes there, this light goes behind, this light dims. And we eventually worked out a system where she'd go wherever she wanted, be completely intuitive and completely inhabit the character, and act. And the performance was breathtaking, until one day the crew, which had been cynical about this process at the beginning, one of the grips, big guy, covered in tattoos, not someone you would look at and say sensitive as a description, came to me and said, I was talking with the other guys, and we thought that it might help Charlize and Christine in this big scene where they're going to say goodbye to each other in the train station if nobody spoke. This was coming from the grips, not from the producer or the writer or the actresses. but from the grip. And that's exactly what we did on that incredible scene. It was dead quiet on the shoot. Nobody spoke. We spoke in sign language.
Wow.
And it created a remarkable atmosphere which facilitated the performance. And I remember halfway through, I could hear one sound, which sounded like someone sniffing or crying. And I turned around and looked at this enormous dolly grip the size of a house. And he was crying at the remarkable quality of performance. And as we finished the film, we finished in a little outdoor amusement park, all of us. And we had all put so much of our life into it in this short 8-week period that everybody was more or less crying and hugging. And we knew we had done something remarkable. And normally, winning an Oscar is such a unique thing. When the film, won Charlize that Oscar, we didn't really even feel particularly surprised. We knew that this was a unique and special experience. So I'm very, very proud of that. Look, I'm proud of doing some innovations, in the early days of commercials and music videos, which people still use today. I'm proud that I wrote a book about film production. I think the thing I'm proudest of is the thing I just was meant to come out this month, which was the Last Call, the one with Malkovich, and the rest I told you about. It's my best writing. It looks stunning. We've shown it to a very limited number of small festivals just to sort of carefully test the waters. And we showed it in Rio, and 4 of the major newspapers there called it Oscar worthy. We showed it in Tallinn, and it won Best Actor. So we then stopped and said, okay, this is something special. I know we'll wait till April of 2020, and everything will align perfectly, and we'll release it then. It wasn't the best plan.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. But it's my best work, and John Malkovich is incredible, and Rhys Ifans gives the performance of a lifetime. I hope you see it when the film comes out. It's incredible.
Well, I definitely will be seeing it, and I hope the viewers will definitely, or the listeners will also be checking out as well. Speaking of COVID-19, so you, I know you've already been affected by it, but are you still being affected by it? And even what do you think the future holds after this?
Look, I think the future is bright for all of us. First of all, I mourn at the tragedy of this for those who lost their lives, for their loved ones, for those who've been seriously ill, and of course, economically, for those who've been affected, their livelihoods and their lives damaged. They may think at this point beyond repair. That is a great and shared tragedy, and that's where we have to begin all these conversations. But that said, as for the future, this has been a remarkable and painful reset for all of us. And I think that for the film industry, we're re-examining techniques and methodologies of how we can, work together. We're looking at what is of value. We're looking at also how important it is that we create a fictive world. If you consider how most people are spending their time, they're sitting at home looking at our work. We're keeping a nation and large parts of the world sane because simply locked away in a space with only your nearest relatives, as much as you love them, is painful beyond all measure. To be able to escape into an imagined world, to share someone else's vision, to get a new perspective on the human condition, has magical and remarkable therapeutic properties. So now that we know that what we do is important, and we know there's a need for it, practically we have to recognize that because no one's shooting films right now, when this is over, there's going to be an incredible rush to make as many films and TV shows and streaming episodes as we possibly can. So the demand is going to be breathtaking, and we all have to be ready. And this is what I mean about the difference between a successful freelancer and an unsuccessful one. The successful one makes use of their downtime to become better at their jobs. So I hope every writer and director and cinematographer right now is working very hard on perfecting their craft, because be it a month from now or 3 months from now or 6 months from now, the demand on our skills and our artistry is going to be beyond all reason and measure. And we're going to be working very hard for a very, very long time. Sure, there'll be changes in behaviors. There's the DGA and I think SAG and IATSE, I think, came up with a document today about how we might all work together, about masks and social distancing and all those sorts of things. And we'll figure that out as we go. But for anyone who thinks that this is the end and there'll be no films, it's not true. We're going to be busier than ever. The problem is going to be the actors. A-list actors are going to have a very hard time rationalizing risking their health and their lives and their careers by coming onto a set. But more significantly, whatever their goodwill may be, if you start shooting a $100 million movie with Matt Damon and he becomes ill the second day of shooting and you shut down, shutting a film that size down is something that is beyond all reason or comprehension, and something that no insurance company will cover. So that's
Mhm.
where the difficulty comes. So I think we'll see a change towards independent films, a great opportunity for relatively unknown actors, where people will start taking risks with actors and relying more on the quality of the writing and the quality of the actor, rather than just say the fame of the actor, to make the film work. And then I think crews will quarantine together. There'll be smaller crews, so smaller risk of infection. And I think we'll find a way to produce a lot of great movies in the next year.
Dang it. I had a good question that I was
No,
just
don't
about
worry.
to
I
ask.
talk a lot. This often happens in my life because I talk in such long and sentences where no one get a breath in, that by the time I finish, no one knows what they're going to say. So don't worry. It's an occupational.
It happens. No, no worries. Um, what is one of your favorite films to watch and to study?
Wow. My son, Adam Bernstein, who's a film editor and writer, once calculated how many films he's seen, and he's in his 30s. And I think it's in the thousands, I think tens of thousands of films. I don't know how many films I've seen in a lifetime, and it really depends on the mood that I'm in, but also what project I'm doing, and whether we're talking about the cinematography, the writing, the acting. Look, there's very few films that Elia Kazan got wrong, so. Streetcar Named Desire, I think, is a masterpiece of a film. I think that Truffaut, went to the as Renoir did, to the humanity that we share. So a film like Bed and Board, or in Renoir's case, a film like now, see, I'm doing the same thing now. My mind's going blank. Grand Illusion is these are masterpieces that move me whenever I see them. Days of Heaven was a film that was so perfect photographically that I still look at it in awe, and it's one that made me want to become a cinematographer. Lawrence of Arabia is to me a perfect combination of a visual and great writing by Robert Bolt. Tree of Life is as complete and radical an intellectual and emotional statement about what it is to be a person as I have ever seen. And its refusal to use conventional narrative constructs makes it hugely important, as are so many other Terrence Malick films great, like Thin Red Line, and The Days of Heaven, which I mentioned before. Hitchcock. Most of Hitchcock is a lesson in how to become a filmmaker. So I think, I can think of few. Vertigo, I think, is probably perfect. A film. Rear Window is a great movie. There are so many. But at these times when I need life affirmation and just positive messaging to myself, Richard Curtis, who's a fantastic British writer, there's a series of films that he did which are life affirming, literally. And I think Love Actually is great for that. Four Weddings and a Funeral, Notting Hill, all those are virtually perfect films. And speaking of great writers, Tom Stoppard, Shakespeare in Love. Again, this is a heavy intellectual fare, and a lot of people would consider it a guilty pleasure because it's not revolutionary filmmaking, but it's damn good filmmaking. So if you ever want to cheer yourself up, look at Shakespeare in Love, and you come away, feeling better, or Love Actually. But just for quality of film, how can you do better than Days of Heaven or Lawrence of Arabia?
That's very true. And even from recently graduating from film school, everybody was all about Citizen Kane, and Orson Welles. And I even just saw recently Orson Welles watched Stagecoach 40 times, and to study and how to film Citizen
Well,
Kane.
John Ford
And
was the master of all masters. So yeah, I didn't even get a chance to mention it. And Orson Welles, I certainly Lady from Shanghai and Touch of Evil, masterpieces.
yeah, and so even just that just goes into proving more, watching films to know how to make
Absolutely.
films, and even just the power of film itself. I know we touched on this a little bit before, but the film has the power of empathy behind it. We are able to pull people into different narrative perspectives, and put other people's in different shoes, and
and order
put them in
and order the
situations.
world. Look, the thing is, the thing that's most frightening to everybody is that the world is chaotic. We don't want to accept the world's chaotic. If you think most of the great movements, intellectual, artistic, religious, ultimately it's taking a kind of disordered world and trying to suggest, don't worry, there's this transcendent order and everything really does make sense, although it may not be manifest to you. So if you think about the obsession that writers have with film structure, it's really saying, okay, here's some characters who are just like you. You can empathize with them. And although things seem difficult, right will out. Things will be put straight. And by the third act, everything is resolved. And we love to think that's the way the world works because it provides comfort. The idea, even now in the political climate, that anything could be arbitrary. We'd much prefer that there be a conspiracy, not because we sanction or delight in evil, but we'd rather there be some author to the evil that we're all experiencing, rather than thinking it's just some virus that happened to occur. Because that's much more terrifying than to think that there's some evil Chinese scientist or Bill Gates or whoever, creating this pandemic. If there's an author to evil, then the author can be eliminated or eradicated and the world can be put straight. But if bad things happen and they're wholly arbitrary and things are chaos, then the world is a frightening place. So one of the reasons that film provides comfort is to suggest order because of this orthodoxy of traditional structure. It's very, very comforting. But some of the greatest filmmakers and some of the greatest writers like Charlie Kaufman don't really use traditional narrative to express their very complex ideas.
Yeah, the ending of a story on such a positive note, I personally dislike, because it's not a mirror of reality most of the time.
Right. And the reality is, and maybe that's a good thing. I mean, maybe reality is so grim for us that maybe that's why we're all home watching movies, because we want to escape reality. We want to see an ordered world. We want to see, look, the last scene, as maudlin and as manipulative as the last scene in Notting Hill is, I can't think of any audience that's seen it that's not rooting for Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant to come together. Love Actually, same thing, this montage of people falling in love and finding partners. The reason we cry at weddings, or when people cry at weddings, is not because it's out of joy. I think it's because it's that bittersweet quality that we know that ultimately experience triumphs over hope. And so for all the romance that we wish was in the world, we know ultimately that most relationships are going to fail. And I think that we wish it wasn't thus, but I think that's why people cry, because the world isn't just or ordered. And it's like experiences like weddings that we recognize that. And film, on the other hand, the world is ordered and romances do last forever. In a romantic comedy, when the couple comes together, we don't have an epilogue where we see them divorced.
That's true.
Assume they're going to be happy there and ever after. And that's part of the joy of the fiction that we create. I don't think we should be ashamed of it or see its essential dishonesty. This is a good dishonesty. It's a dishonesty that provides love and succor and strength and comfort. And what we do, I think, is kind of a sacred charge. We actually make the world a better place. And if not a better place, a more tolerable place.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility that we have. And just for, see, I'm doing it again. I had a thought and then it went away. But, for you have multiple roles. You're a director, you're a writer, you're a cinematographer, and juggling all of these at once, and each role has its own, just so many sets of different things that it needs to take care of. And I know in this one video you mentioned, communicating with the actors as a director is completely different than as a cinematographer.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Look, your jobs are very different and very, very complicated. Look, when I was doing Decoding Annie Parker, the one with Helen Hunt and Samantha Morton, I contemplated for a very short time whether I should be both cinematographer and director as well as writer and one of the producers, and decided against it because, directing is a full-time occupation, and even when you're not speaking to the actors, you're thinking about the performance, and you have to be focused with like a laser type precision on that performance. I remember Patty Jenkins on Monster, the intensity with which she looked at the actors, and the minute the performance was finished, the headphones would go down, she'd rush the set and speak privately to the actors about what notes they were hitting. I try to replicate that in my own work with actors, be it in theater, where I've worked a lot, or in film, and let them know that I'm there for them completely, that I'm watching every single thing they do. If I'm both cinematographer and director, I can't do that. The cinematographer, on the other hand, cares very much about the actors as well. But I explained on Monster how we facilitated a performance. But then also we want them to know that we're going to get every aspect of what they're doing. So I'll explain to actors where the key light is, where the backlight is, how they'll look if they stand in one position, how they'll look if they sit in another position, to give them tools to add to their arsenal to create the effect in the audience that they want. Producer, something different again. You're thinking about money. And when we do films, people give us large sums of money and we got to get it back. So as a producer, you want to put together the team that most likely to have success, and you want to do it for the smallest possible money you can. And sometimes that means the cinematographer, the director have to make sacrifices in their creative vision. It's difficult finding the happy middle ground between all these people full of integrity and good intentions, all wanting the same thing, making a successful film, but no one entirely agreeing what the method for that is. I mean, I used to say to accountants, yeah, I could save you money, but are you going to stand up in the theater and say, this scene doesn't work well, but we saved $700?
Yeah,
Ultimately the quality matters, but at the same time, if you go over budget, you're not going to work for long in this industry.
that's very true. I know that film has the ability to teach us so much, even just as an audience member. But as a filmmaker, what do you think you have learned from film?
Everything. I mean, everything I know about life, I've learned in film. It's the greatest classroom I think that one can have. I've learned in working with others. I've learned about how creative expression is sacred because it allows us to understand the world and shape it, or try to
Mm,
reshape it. And through its reshaping, we come to better understanding how it works. It's made me focus on language and communication, so I understand better how people encode ideas. They don't always mean what they say. They don't always know what they're saying, which I think is essential to an understanding of human nature. I've learned also that working in a high stress, high risk occupation, that you have to be at peace with yourself, that there is no real objective reality that you think you're experiencing. When you're so sure you're right and objectively you're right, you can be sure someone else has a very different perspective. So
mhm.
ultimately, you see everything is delusional, that everything is not exactly as it appears to you. And it gives you a greater sense of flexibility and forgiveness and understanding. But also that sense of coming together to create something, the satisfaction when you've worked for months or a year on a movie. And then when you're in the laboratory and you see all the elements come together and all works, the joy that accords you is unlike any other experience you can virtually have in life. Same thing the last day of a shoot, when you look around all these people, 150 or 200 or it's 10 people, whatever it is, and you've worked so hard on a shared vision, that camaraderie, that
Mhm.
family, that link is so emotional. Get the same thing in theater when a show wraps. It's special. And so for all those things, it created for me a list of things that I find valuable. It's people. It's ordinary decency. It's self-sacrifice. It's risk-taking. And it's understanding that your own vision, although you're sure is right, is just one vision among many. And you have this idea that comes from Buddhism of impermanence, that all things you think are certain aren't certain and constantly have to be re-examined, and the sense of endless growth, that on every film I learn something, so I never want to stop working because I'm still learning, and I'm a much better, more evolved person than I was 30 years ago, but I still have a long way to go.
And you mentioned managing stress, and I mean, as a student filmmaker, past student filmmaker, I was stressed out over $5,000 budgets, and so when you start getting into the $5 million budgets, I mean, how does the thing is like I know this stress has prepared me to manage that stress. But it just seems like completely two different worlds. And I'm curious, how does one manage to stay sane when you have that much depending on you?
Well, it's a great question, and also to do with a sense of individual freedom. The thing that prevents us from being free more than anything else is fear. And we then have to analyze our fear. And what are we frightened of? We're frightened of failing, of humiliation, of ridicule, of losing our jobs, whatever it is. When we look at that, we recognize that ultimately and oddly, the fear is what's most likely going to make those things happen, not the activity we've undertaken. It's being paralyzed with terror that prevents us from functioning as well as we might. The second thing is to realize that all of us, everyone on a film set, every actor, every crew member, no matter how experienced, everybody's coming in with some level of fear. They don't show it. They have their game faces on, but they're frightened. And when you recognize the shared humanity, and also, most importantly, this is the thing that's facilitated me most often, when you're willing to admit to others that you're frightened, potentially inadequate, what you're worried about, and you're open and honest with people, the decency of others is remarkable. I virtually start every film I work on by saying to people around me, I'm not certain I know what I'm doing. I'm not certain that when I'm doing this particular thing, I'm going to get it right. I'm going to need your help. Please help me. And when you're open and honest with people, rather than trying to be the director who knows everything, particularly when you don't know anything, as it might be your first movie or second movie or third movie, then people step forward and try to help. And it doesn't mean that they're going to start directing for you, but they might give you a note. You might think, I'm not going to use that now, but thank you. But as long as you create an atmosphere where you show your own vulnerability, then people will show you theirs and help you. It's very much like writing a character. We watch so many action films. We think that what makes a character appealing is core competency. I assure you it's not. What makes a character appealing is humanity, weaknesses, inconsistencies, fear, and need. And if we treat every film that we're working on like the films that we're shooting and show other people our fear and our need and how we need them to help us, then we're not alone. And once we're not alone, then we have a support structure and we can't fail. I learned long ago a very simple trick. It's not really a trick. It goes to do with my integrity. Whenever something would go wrong, I would say to people, I got it wrong. It's my fault. And even when it was other people's fault in my department, I would say, I got it wrong. It's my fault. So they wouldn't be blamed. So first of all, everyone in my department felt safe because they knew they would never be persecuted by the producers. But also got to the point where the producers would presume that I was never frightened of taking responsibility. So when something wasn't my fault, and I said, yeah, that wasn't my call, and they would say, okay, he told us, the truth, and that made me much stronger as a person, not being frightened to take responsibility when something went wrong, admitting fault, admitting need, admitting fear, enlisting others in the help, and it becomes much easier. It's only when we posture and try to pretend that we're great and that we know everything that not only do we make fools of ourselves, but that's when we fail.
Very true. Yeah. And I think that was even what I thought about earlier when you were mentioning to, when you communicate to the wardrobe and to all of these different departments, you don't need to know everything, and I think that's what's so great about the collaboration of all these other departments is that you want, somebody else to bring in their individual uniqueness and their perspective on
I've
the
got
story.
a composer, Steve Branson, who I work with all the time, brilliant guy. And I'll say to Steve, here are my ideas. I've listened to this piece of music I kind of like, but I feel very uncomfortable with music generally, Steve. And so this is what the feeling I'm trying to create. I'm thinking maybe a harp might be cool. I'm not sure. Here's a film that I like, a film called Witness. If you've ever seen the construction of the barn and Witness, it's an incredible sequence, all relying on editing and music. I want something like that, but I don't know exactly what it is. Could you do some pieces for me and then play them for me and we can talk about it? And that's what he did. And I'd be inspired. I'd come back to him with some ideas and away we go. If I'd gone in and told him prescriptively what I wanted, pretending to try to show off to him how expert I was in music, I would have made a fool of myself, or the film would have been less than it is.
Mm-hmm. Just always being humble is the best way to go.
Humble and honest, and show. If you're frightened, say to people, hey, if you're the
Hmm.
first day on the set, first thing I would say to people is, my first day on the set, I'm really scared I'm going to make a fool of myself. You know what people do when you say that to them? They'll say, I'll look after you.
They, yeah, they'll loosen up too. They won't be
Exactly.
so tense. And yeah. Um, is that with your composer? Is that the longest collaboration
Oh
relationship that
God,
you
no, no,
have?
no. Mike Ferris, who's a legendary camera operator who worked with John Cassavetes, Orson Welles, among others. I began working with Michael, God knows how many years ago, but I know I shot, I think, 20 feature films with him, I think. So we went to India
Wow.
together. We went all over the United States, went to Canada, and so on. We've been everywhere, and he's a little bit older than I am. Incredibly dignified guy. No, he knew Orson Welles. He knew John Cassavetes. He was John Cassavetes' camera operator on Women Under the Influence and lots of other films. And just a very personable, charming um, uh, person an energy you love to have on set. You mentioned Aaron Paul, again, the same sort of guy who just, you delight in being around him because they're so warm and giving. And when I'm not there to look after everybody, Michael's like a father to the crew, and and a great camera operator. He can use any piece of equipment and make it just look elegant. And he's worked on films like Scarface and um, Die Hard. So there isn't anything you can hand him that he can't do.
Oh, that's incredible when you're able to build a team like that. I have all of my films that I've personally like written and directed. I've had the same composer for years now, at
That's
least
cool.
almost 10 years. And yeah, now, even these new relationships with my cinematographer and all that, I hope to continue on into the
Yeah, one
future.
thing I'll say about that, a lot of people are frightened of hiring very experienced people. You sound like you've evolved past that, but often with student films, you see people hiring, student actors. Professional actors are available for student films, and really great crew members are available with like 30 years experience. But you'll see these directors thinking, oh, I don't want to bring on that old curmudgeon who's going to look at me and judge me. They're not going to be judging you. They're going to be helping you. And I would rather have somebody with 20 or
Exactly.
30 years experience helping me than having somebody who was just a sycophant saying, you're great, you're great, you're great, and having no idea what they're doing.
Is there anything to my listeners who they're all aspiring directors and filmmakers, anything that you want to say, words of encouragement,
Which is,
words of
I would
wisdom,
just
all of this?
repeat what we said in this last hour, which is fear is only destructive when it's not shared. Everybody is frightened, and you have to free yourself of fear, and everything goes with it. You'll find yourself wanting to avoid contact with others. You'll want to keep your head down, not speak to people, or not show your vulnerabilities. And the paradox of this is the best way to overcome that is do the exact opposite. To tell people you're frightened, to show them your vulnerabilities, and most importantly, to ask for help. Even as a director, you can do it in a dignified way, saying, yes, I will be the unifying creative intelligence. Yes, I will have a vision, but I don't have the answers all the time. And you, some of whom are more experienced than I, and I hope you're going to be hiring experienced crews, but some of you will have different visions than mine. Please share them with me and let me think about them and maybe incorporate them in the movie. I want you to help me most of all. And secondly, to realize that the world is capricious, that opportunities come and go, and others will succeed while you're failing, and vice versa. You should never fret or compare yourself to anyone else. Things happen at their own,
Hmm.
speed, and most importantly, you should recognize that it's very odd the way the world's set up. We're always aware of the bad news. You think about just living an ordinary life. Once a month, your bill comes or your bills come. They will always come. You know that they're coming. They announce themselves and they arrive. The thing that doesn't announce itself is your success, because it's brewing all the time by you being a person who gets along with others, avoiding conflict, improving yourself in off time, um, uh, developing a highly evolved skill set, but also building a network of contacts and friends. You are guaranteeing your future success, which will arrive without announcement, without garlands or French horns or a marching band. It simply appears, and it'll seem magical, but it's not magical because you have prepared yourself for that moment. So, in your darkest private time, when you think that it's never going to happen for you, remember Bad news is always with you. Good news is always coming. It's just not manifest yet. But what you have to have most of all, the single most significant virtue, is perseverance. To just keep going and going and going and going. And then inevitably, the energy you're putting into your success will guarantee you that success. You just don't know when it's going to happen.
Stephen, thank you so much. Yeah, really, thank you so much for coming on and for speaking to chatting with me and to speak with my listeners. Please tell us where we can all follow you. I know you have a class online now. Please tell
Yeah,
everybody
well,
about
I
that.
you can I do a lot of stuff on Instagram, which is Stephen Bernstein, director, writer on Instagram. And what I do is every day I try to show some illustration of the principles, some of which I've talked about here, and others about lighting, about directing actors, about casting, about producing, about screenwriting. And then also on Instagram, I will announce periodically online seminars, which I will provide, or webinars, which I try to do about every other week, and usually like 3 a week. I've done some on lighting, on directing, producing the independent film. I'm doing one, I think, next week on screenwriting. You can also find me, although lesser presence still there, on Twitter, and that's Steve B Film, all small case, the letter B, Steve B Film. And you can also find me on Facebook, which is Stephen Bernstein, and it's swapped from what it is on Instagram. So it's a writer-director rather than director-writer. And yeah, I've been trying to give back. So I'm giving lots of talks and lectures. I can't do them live anymore, so I'm doing them here on the internet, and I will announce them on those platforms. And I encourage people to follow because they're free. I give you my knowledge and understandings and wisdoms for what they're worth, as my kindness and my obligation, because so many people have been kind to me over the years.
Hello, everyone. If you liked this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Why not follow me on Instagram as well, at Matt Macedo, and go to my website, www.mattmacedo.com, if you would like to see any of my past projects.